Hello, today David Goldman is joining us. He's the author of the book Civilizatot Gov'ot, and in English, How Civilizations Die and Why Islam is Dying Too, and an analyst and fellow at the Claremont Institute Center of the American Way, and deputy editor in Asia Times. Hello, thank you very much for joining us.
Tamir, it's a great honor. Thank you very much for inviting me.
In the recent war in Gaza, people don't really know the evidence and the demographics, and they think that the Arab woman is bringing more kids to the world, more than Israel and more in other parts of the world. But in your book, you found out by the CIA data that the Arab woman is bringing less kids into the world, and also the European is bringing more kids into the world, and that the Islamic civilization is dying as well as the West. So I really like to hear your perspective and your thesis from your book, The Dying Civilizations.
Tamir, there's an enormous gap between modern and pre-modern. In pre-modern traditional society, people had children the same way cats and dogs have children. You have as many as you can. And children in pre-modern society, which is mainly agricultural, were an asset. They were cheap labor. The more you had, the better economically. Once you get past the traditional agricultural society and you go into the modern world where children become a luxury good or a spiritual good, your own children are not what you count on to take care of you in your old age. You have a social security system. At that point, in most of the world, birth rates collapse. People simply stop having children. So we see this in the most extreme way in East Asia, where the average woman has basically one child, a little bit above that. In Western Europe, native-born European women have 1.2, 1.3, which means you're not going to be a country for very much longer. And still in pre-modern society, where people have the habits of their ancestors, Africa, Middle East, Pakistan, you have extremely high birth rates. So the African fertility rate is 6 children per female. That's because even though, in a sense, Africa has left traditional society, the mental habits still pertain. In the Muslim world, we see a disruptive and painful transition. So wherever women become literate, and that's probably the best measure of modernity in the Muslim world, fertility rates drop well below break even. For the population to stay constant, you need a little bit over 2 children per female because somebody's going to get into an auto accident. And if you look at the two Muslim populations, which have the highest education rates, Iran and Turkey, you have fertility rates well below break even. This has been a major issue for the Iranians for the last dozen years, where they know that they are a rapidly aging society. It's a poor country, and by the middle of this century, they will have an elderly dependent ratio comparable to that of Western Europe. In the case of Turkey, the Turks are having very few children, but the Kurds, who are still a more traditional people, are having a lot. So the Turkish fertility rate is about 1.5 children per female. The Kurdish is 3. And what has Erdogan so upset is that in 20, 25 years, the majority of young people of military age in Turkey are going to be from Kurdish-speaking families. So he's in a race against time to try to deal with a problem which may not have a solution. If you look at Gaza and the West Bank, the argument always was victory will go to the Arab womb. Demographically, the Arabs will outnumber us because of demographics. But in fact, there's been a straight line decline in fertility, both in Gaza and the West Bank, so that it's really about 3 per female, which is the same as in Israel. Israel is an amazing exception to the rest of the industrial world in so many ways, but one very tangible manifestation of Israel's uniqueness is that the whole rest of the industrial world has an average fertility rate of about 1.5 children per female. Israel has 3 per female, and that's not just the Haredi. You take the Haredi out, it's still 2.5. So it's totally unique and different, off the charts.
So
And the
if you
question
look
is
at the
why?
chart, yeah, so if you look at the charts, I just put the chart in the screen. It's from Gapminder. It's a really great website. You can see that there is a correlation between being rich and committing suicide as not bringing a next generation into the world. You see all the richest countries in the world are below replacement rate, and some of the also poor countries in the world are below, but most of them are above. So if you're rich, you're bringing less kids, and if you're poor, you're bringing more.
Yeah, I think the best distinction is pre-modern and post-modern. It's not just money. And uh, just iteratively, I tried every correlation of social indicators, and by far the best predictor in the case of the Muslim world is female literacy. It's not income, but female literacy. The moment women have an identity separate from the family, they're no longer stuck in a traditional role, you see fertility drop drastically. And Iran is the most extreme example of this. So when I say Islam is dying too, Islam has not, the Islamic countries have, with very few exceptions, been unable to make the transition from pre-modern to post-modern. And because the transition has been so rapid in the case of um, Iran and the Turkish part of Turkey, leaving aside the Kurdish southeast, because it's so rapid, the rate of aging of populations is extreme. And that will cause down the road terrible social problems because poor countries don't have the income base to support a large aging population. If you're Japan, you're a rich country, you can invest your money overseas and clip coupons. You can get investment income to take care of your aging population. Rich countries can manage it. If you're China, you can raise productivity. But Iran and Turkey, and indeed Algeria, Tunisia, many other countries uh, are likely to suffer dire problems. So either you have Muslim countries with too many young people, they don't know what to do with them, or too many old people and they can't support them because it's a one generation disruptive sudden shift. And I believe this produces both a spiritual and a political crisis in Muslim countries.
Yeah, so you're talking about two crises. Before that, would really want to emphasize one word or one sentence that you said before, which blow my mind, which is, if you don't have social security, you bring kids, and if you do have social security, you don't. Like, this is the best incentive to bring kids, the economic support that they will give you when you will be old. So if the West wants to, revive again and to bring more kids again, it needs to cut off the welfare state and really try to bring back the traditional family who takes care of the elders. And that way, maybe to make the connections in between families or between the generations in one family much stronger. So you would have to take care of your elders in order to look yourself in the mirror, right?
Well, that I don't think we can get rid of social security systems. I don't think that's politically possible. And there are good reasons for social security systems. Sometimes people don't have children. Why should they starve to death in their old age just because they're unlucky? However, there are things you can do. Hungary is a very good example. In Hungary, more than 10% of the state budget goes to family subsidies, much more than anywhere else in the world. If you've got 4 children in Hungary, you pay no income taxes, completely exempt. Uh, this has had a certain degree of success. In the 2010 census, Hungary's fertility rate, I think, was about 1.2, but the Magyar fertility rate, that is ethnic Hungarians, was only about 0.82. It was one of the lowest in the world. They didn't publish that number. Viktor Orban, who I think has had a very competent, well thought out approach, offered enormous incentives, biggest in the world, for family formation. So now fertility is about 1.6. It's still below break even in Hungary, but the improvement in Hungary has been the biggest anywhere in the world. And I consider that an accomplishment. But I think even more than economic incentives, the spiritual desire to have children is by far the most important thing. If you think of children as a spiritual good, if you're a German, I know Germans who say, well, I'd rather spend money on vacations than having children. Now, from a Jewish standpoint, this is unthinkable. Jewish life is entirely centered around children, about creating a new generation. The life cycle from from Brit to Bar Mitzvah to Shidduch is all about children. To be a Jew without children is a tragedy. Half the drama in the Torah in Bereshit is about the infertility of our ancestors and the struggle to have children. So I believe that the Jewish view of historical continuity and positioning ourselves for a future in the present is the real reason for high Jewish fertility. By the way, I should say that very religious people in the West, religious Christians, also have a high fertility rate. It's not only Jews, it's characteristically Jewish, but it's also the case that very religious Catholics and religious Protestants show similar fertility behavior. And of course, if you look at fertility in Israel, you can see that the Haredi have the most, and then traditional Jews who are Shomer Mitzvot also have a few more, and the most secular have the fewest. So there are gradations in terms of religious practice. So I'd like to say this is uniquely Jewish, but you can also say it's Judeo-Christian.
So what you were saying about the Islam is that the lack of children reflects the will to live, or the will to bring another generation for this world because they like this world, or because they think this life is worth living. Like the Hamas said, we like death as much Israeli like to live.
Yeah, this is an interesting phenomenon. I think that Islam, it's not only my view, there have been many books about this by Islamic scholars as well as non-Islamic scholars. Islam has a problem with modernity. As an ideology, as a hashkafa, Islam is alien to modern science. We can talk about this at great length. In the Al-Ghazali synthesis of the 12th century, the idea of causality, that if I light a match to gasoline, it goes on fire because the chemical characteristic of the gasoline is susceptible to fire. That is an offense to Allah, because in Al-Ghazali's view, everything that happens is subject to the immediate will of Allah. If I put a gun to your head and pull the trigger, the bullet goes to your brain because Allah has willed it to, not because there is a necessary relationship between the trigger, the primer, the gunpowder, and the bullet. So without a notion of causality, which makes scientific investigation possible, Islam for the last 8 centuries has had a very poor time in science. Uh, I think that from the standpoint of young Muslims trying to adapt to the Muslim world, either uh, you make a great conceptual effort to adapt to the modern world, and you succeed. And you see that in some parts of the Muslim world. You see Iranian expatriates, for example, adapting very well. But in other parts of the Muslim world, you have a sense of anomie, of alienation from the modern world and despair. So I think that Muslim despair at coping with a modern world is a source, it helps explain why virtually all the world's terrorism is Muslim terrorism. I don't mean to say all Muslims are terrorists. It's obviously not true. A minority are terrorists. But on the other hand, if you look at terrorist incidents around the world in the last 30 years, something like 98% are committed by Muslims. So there is a large portion, not a majority, but a significant, important portion of the Muslim world which experiences a catastrophic alienation when it attempts to enter modernity and fails to do so.
So what you're basically saying is that there is a connection between the believing in free will and not bringing children into the world, or not coping with modernity and with science and with all this set of ideas?
That's exactly what you observe in Iran and Turkey. Iran is the first Muslim country to achieve close to full literacy. That's thanks to the Shah. The Shah had a brilliant program called literacy brigades. Instead of going to the army in Iran, you could go to a village and teach reading. So many people did, and they had a spectacular increase in literacy during the 1970s. And immediately, as women were educated, their birth rate dropped. They rejected traditional marriage, they rejected traditional female roles, they became educated, entered the workforce, and the birth rate collapsed. So you see that from the time of Khomeini, where you had an average of 7 children per female in Iran, down to the present, it's now about 1.5, 1.6. And that rapid decline is just catastrophic because before Khomeini, you had two parents with 7 children to take care of them. Now you've got 2 parents with 1 or 2 children to take care of them in a very poor country where people can barely earn enough to feed themselves. So Iran is looking at a disaster, and that is a major source, I think, of Iran's aggressive and dangerous and self-destructive behavior. Now, another thing I would add, Tamir, is that if you look at the history of the world, how many, every morning we talk about the land of Canaan, which had Canaanite and Jebusi and all these other people. I've never met a Jebusite, to use the English word. I've never met a Kenite. I don't know who these people are. No one knows who they are. The philologists, the linguisticians, estimate that perhaps 150,000 languages have been spoken on planet Earth since humans came along, maybe since the Tower of Babel. How many are spoken now? Really, a few thousand. So what happened to most of the 150,000 languages? They became extinct. The majority of civilizations die. Now, in the past, small peoples knew that their time on Earth was limited. Even their gods were mortal. The Greek gods were immortal but not eternal. People knew that they had an expiration date. What Islam has done is to take the small tribes of the Middle East and Africa at the time of the fall of the Roman Empire and turn them into an army and give them a sense that Islam is the source of their survival. Now, when you look at a group like Hamas, the Palestinian people are a problematic people. They're never really a people until 1963. They were stateless Arabs who were dumped in camps because the Arab countries refused to accept them. And the idea of a Palestinian people came later. They're extremely fragile. The only reason for the Palestinians to be there as a people was as a hostage, a trading point against Israel. At the point where Saudi Arabia was ready to sign diplomatic relations with Israel, Hamas would become completely irrelevant. The Palestinian situation would be irrelevant. They'd simply go back to being stateless Arabs. And for Hamas, this was justification for actions which they knew might be suicidal. I think Israel very likely will crush Hamas. I hope it does. I pray for the success of the IDF. If it does, Hamas will cease to exist, and these actions will turn out to be an action of suicide. But it would not be the first time that people fought until there was no one left to fight. This is a common and tragic occurrence in history. It's not new.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that the demographics makes a crisis in politics, in strategy, and in society as well. So you are the one of the few that is talking about the demographics in the Arab world. And what does the Iranian society is thinking about when they see the demographics going down? Why does it make them so violent and so into wars all over the world and supporting all those militias? What's the connection between being violent and low demographics?
Iran has a lot of young people now. That's because fertility was very high in the 70s and 80s. In 20 years, it will have very few young people. It won't be able to put together a large army. In 100 years, Israel will have as many military age people as Iran if the current trends are projected linearly. Of course, you can't project current trends linearly. I'm only saying that for emphasis. So Iran has a 10-year window to be a major power. Now, Iran is the standard bearer for Shia Islam, and it has wanted to create a Shia empire that goes from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean by uh, essentially taking control of Lebanon, of Syria, of Iraq, and going through to parts of Pakistan. The idea is to establish Shia control of the maximum territory that it can while it still has the force to do it. And also, I think Iran has set its sights on part of Saudi's oil. The eastern province of Saudi Arabia, which is the main source of Saudi oil, is majority Shia. So the opportunity for Iranian subversion is considerable. Now, that impulse has limits. For one thing, the United States is an obstacle, although I think the United States has acted stupidly with the Iranian regime. We can talk about that at length. But another obstacle is China. China gets most of its oil from the Persian Gulf. It doesn't want a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The worst thing that could happen to China is a Persian Gulf War, no more oil. So China is Iran's biggest customer for oil, and it's its biggest provider of industrial goods, including weapons. So it has a lot of say. And earlier this year, to everyone's surprise, China brokered a restoration of diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I think the inherent tendency, the impulse of the Iranian regime is towards violence and conquest, but they've got limits. If they push too far against Israel, Israel can retaliate militarily. Their biggest economic partner, China, is not at all happy about Iranian adventurism. And the United States also has some say in the matter. the fact that the United States put a carrier group in the Eastern Mediterranean next to the coast of Lebanon was a direct threat to the Iranians to intervene against their militias if, for example, Hezbollah started a serious attack on Israel. This is a commonly held view. For example, James Clapper, who was director of national intelligence under Obama, was interviewed recently, and he said he was asked if the United States would intervene against Hezbollah. He said, "Well, why else would you put the aircraft carrier there? If you have that kind of military asset and you don't use it when your ally is under serious attack, you lose credibility." So yes, it would be used. So yes, Iran is extremely dangerous, but I think there are also limits at least in the near term how how many risks it will take.
Yeah, so as always, the the geopolitics is really something that is complex. It's hard to analyze, and there are so many players in the picture that you can't really say anything for sure. So you're basically saying that China is against a war between Israel, Iran, maybe Saudi Arabia, the United States? Because I heard many that say that China maybe wants this war in order to conquer Taiwan, which they see as a part of their homeland and a place that threatens them ideologically, and they want to take it over, while the United States and all of the partners are focused on Ukraine and on Israel, so they can take Taiwan while there's a huge mess in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe.
I don't think that makes any sense. China sees Taiwan as an existential issue. There's a deep reason for that. China is not a nation state. China is an empire. The Chinese speak 200 dialects in 6 major language groups. China has never been unified the way, say, the United States was unified. You come to America, you learn English, you become an American, you adopt an American ideology. The second generation forgets the language, and people are integrated. It's a melting pot. In China, you learn to write the characters. They've got a universal written language, but you speak your own dialect. No mother has ever sung her baby to sleep in Chinese. There is no such thing as Chinese language. Mandarin is the Beijing court dialect. A minority of Chinese speak Mandarin conversationally. So there's always a threat that the empire can break up again, particularly with foreign intervention. This has happened innumerable times in Chinese history. The empire breaks up and is reformed. And whatever government sits in Beijing lives in terror that a renegade province will succeed in breaking away from the empire, because if one breaks away, everybody can break away. Taiwan, in the Chinese view, is a renegade province. So they will go to war to stop Taiwan from becoming independent. However, if Taiwan does not make a move towards independence, they have no reason to risk a war. Now, at the moment, China militarily is very strong in some areas, very weak in others. The PLA as a land army is very poor, poorly equipped, poorly trained, doesn't have particularly good equipment. But China's missile force and air force and submarines are first rate. China has maybe 2,500 surface to ship missiles with satellite guidance. And according to US military sources published, they can sink anything on the surface within 1,000 miles of their coast. So China doesn't have to worry about the American Navy at this point. The American Navy is outgunned. They also have close to 1,000 modern aircraft. We don't know how good they are. They've never been in a fight, but assume they can do something. If China's not going to invade Taiwan, this is something you hear from American strategists all the time, but that's 70 miles of water. This isn't 1944. It's not D-Day. You're not going to put landing craft in the water and send them for 70 miles and lose most of them. They can just blockade the island. Taiwan has storage capacity for 11 days of natural gas. The economy will shut down in 2 weeks. So if China wants a blockade, it has nothing to do with what's happening in the Middle East. The idea that America is distracted, that's not the issue. Ukraine is a different issue. I thought that we made a big mistake with Ukraine. I believe, as Viktor Orban has said, as former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has said from Germany, that there was room for compromise with Putin on the basis of the Minsk II agreement, and that we decided to push the expansion of NATO and provoke Putin to invade. Now, I'm not saying Putin's a good guy. What Putin did was wrong. Putin's a bad guy. But just because he's a bad guy doesn't mean I want to get into a fight with him. And I think Washington vastly miscalculated. We thought that the economic sanctions would shut the Russian economy down. Putin would be out of office. We'd humiliate Russia. And we didn't. Russian economy is doing okay. China has tripled its exports to Russia, maybe more. The official number is tripled. And Russia has a stalemate with Ukraine. And as casualties pile up, Ukraine will run out of people before Russia does. So the war was terrible waste, miscalculation by the US. And if you're Taiwan, you look at what's happening in Ukraine and you remember what Henry Kissinger said, which is it's dangerous to be America's enemy, but often fatal to be America's ally.
So actually, that leads us to my next question. Kissinger once said in the Yom Kippur War in 1973 about the Israelis, let them bleed. We don't want American allies to win so much or to win in an easy way. We want them to bleed, and that way we will have one force which is Israel, another force which is Egypt, which wouldn't be humiliated too much, and that way the Americans could deal an agreement between Israel and Egypt, because if Israel had won in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War easily, it wouldn't want to give back the Sinai Peninsula, and it would keep it to herself, and that way we couldn't move Egypt from the Soviet allies into American allies. And this thing happens maybe today between Israel, Gaza, Hezbollah, and Iran. Maybe the United States doesn't want Israel to win too easily and wants us to bleed and not to solve the problems from the root. And that way they could negotiate with Iran about the deal, about the nuclear deal, and about all other things. So maybe what you're saying is from Kissinger is something we should learn, that the US is not really a great ally to do exactly what they say. Maybe we should take care of our own interest and as Israelis.
This is a very difficult situation. I think your point about Kissinger is well taken. I am not a fan of Henry Kissinger. I've written some unpleasant things about him in the past. Not a stupid man, but certainly not our friend, and certainly not a good Jew. I think that in the current situation, the United States does not have a plan for Hamas and Hezbollah. Both American intelligence and Israeli intelligence, from what I can tell, were taken by surprise by Hamas. I believe that Hamas acted to a great extent on its own, and it did so because the Abraham Accords, the possibility of a Saudi peace with Israel, would make it irrelevant forever. And it decided to risk everything, to gamble its existence on remaining a factor. No one expected that to happen, so the United States didn't have a plan. Neither did Israel, but Israel reacted quickly, and Israel's plan, from what I can see, is to destroy Hamas and make it impossible for Gaza to be a base against Israel again, effectively destroying the northern half of Gaza and parts of the south. So I think that's the right thing to do. And given the fact that the United States has its own credibility at stake, by acting decisively and quickly, Israel made it very difficult for the United States to hold it back. And the only thing the United States could do was to tell the Iranians not to get involved. Once the dust settles, the Biden administration will go back to some scheme for appeasing and bribing the Iranians, which will be as stupid and counterproductive as all of America's previous schemes for appeasing and bribing the Iranians. The difference is China, as I said before, is now a big factor in Iran, which it wasn't a dozen years ago. And that's something the United States is trying to come to terms with. I'm sure that's something Biden and Xi Jinping discuss in San Francisco. China is neither for Israel nor against it, but exactly the opposite. China has no friends, no allies, no ideology, pure pragmatic self-interest. You can't be China's friend. It's not an option. The question is, what are China's interests and what are Israel's interests? So Israel has a couple of points of leverage with China. One is China would not like it if Israel blew up its oil refineries and its oil terminals. Then the oil price would go to what, $500 a barrel? China would have to pay it. They don't like that. So that's important negotiating room. And the Chinese know that Israel is the most powerful military in the Middle East, and they respect it. On the other hand, China gets a free ride. It costs them nothing to attack Israel and support Hamas, to try to encourage their friends in the Muslim world. It's free. So they'll do it. It's immoral and it's nasty and it's unpleasant, but that's China. Why shouldn't they do it? It doesn't cost them anything. And they always know they can go talk to Israel afterwards. Now, one thing that's not adequately understood about China is how important the so-called global South is for China. China now exports more to the Muslim countries than it does to the United States. Just 5 or 6 years ago, China exported twice as much to the United States as it did to the Muslim world. Now it's more to the Muslim world. Where's that coming from? Well, Central Asia is huge. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf. Unfortunately, not so much Egypt, and not so much Pakistan. China's making an enormous economic bet on Central Asia and Turkey. That's the Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road. So both for security reasons, they want to keep their borders under control because they have their own Muslim problem, and for economic reasons. That's a huge investment in the Muslim world. Now, years ago, even 2018, 2019, I attended meetings in Beijing with Israelis. I'm on the board of an organization called Signal, Sino-Israel.org, which conducts discussions between China and Israel. And the Chinese would say, senior Chinese people, gee, Israelis, could you please go to Washington and help us with this Uyghur problem? We're being attacked as a human rights violator because of the Uyghurs. And the Israelis would say, why should we help you? Why do you help us with Hamas? And the Chinese would say, but we've got all these Muslims to deal with. We don't want to get them upset. And the Israelis would say, that's baloney. Look at Modi in India. He's got more Muslims than you do, and he votes with us at the UN. They argued it was bargaining. So there are lots. China's interests are long term. The Chinese have been around for 5,000 years. We've been around for a bit over 3,500 years. Neither of us is going away. And China will be more important in the Middle East. So Israel needs to have an open channel to China, remembering that China is never our friend. It's not a replacement. America is an ally. It's a problematic ally, sometimes a bad ally, but it is an attack. Washington has to support us. They have no choice, or they lose all credibility. China, from one day to the next, can help us or hurt us. It's a totally different relationship.
Yeah, actually, the India is another superpower, maybe a growing superpower that will be more dominant in the past few years, but we usually ignore it. Like we hear a lot about China, about Iran, but between China and Iran, there is India. And people don't really talk about India. India is dealing with a lot of Muslims, as you say, but they don't really project power.
Well, that's exactly the point. They don't project power. They're not interested in projecting power. From a military standpoint, they're completely tied up with Pakistan. That's partly due to China, which has supported Pakistan to keep India preoccupied with Pakistan. India is it doesn't have the economic resources for soft power. China has lent much more than $1 trillion to the global south to finance development, exports, and so forth. India is a borrower. China has an enormous trade surplus. It's a net exporter of goods. India is a net importer of goods. As a matter of fact, apart from oil, China is India's biggest supplier of industrial goods. It's a third of all of India's imports, apart from oil. So India is not going to be a strategic factor in the way that China is because it's concerned about its internal problems. And it will be for a long time. India has terrible infrastructure. It has a very large number of people who live on $3 a day, a lot of absolute poverty. For all the bad things you can say about China, you have to concede that they lifted people out of absolute poverty in a way no one else did. India has a lot to do to deal with its own infrastructure, education, basic needs of people. So, although India is a natural market for Israel, particularly for weapons, and I think it's very good for Israel to cultivate relations with India, India is not having the impact in the region that China does. Now, as you know, the Biden administration proposed a Mediterranean to India corridor, try to enhance India's role. That's a nice idea, but there's no real money behind it. And it's really a placeholder for a future policy. I would love to see the United States get together with Japan and South Korea and other countries, Germany, with real industrial capacity, and compete with China in the global South. But right now, for example, for telecom infrastructure, which is the single most important thing you need in a developing country, everyone goes to Huawei. Huawei does a great job of building telecom infrastructure cheaply and in a way that's easy to maintain in very poor countries. It helps them. So China develops a lot of power that way. And China is more and more embedded in the Muslim world. What does China want from Israel? Technology. The United States has been telling Israel, put controls on the export of technology to China. So China tells Israel, well, if we can't buy your technology, which is the thing we want most from you, what are you good for? So they'll beat us up. And China also wants to beat up the United States. So we're an American ally, and we get beaten up as a proxy to the United States. It's not because they hate us, it's because it's a convenient way to beat up the United States. And they have no principles. It's only what's pragmatically useful at any given time.
When you say, if we can't buy your technology, I hear, if we can't steal your technology, so what are you good for?
Well,
Actually,
you know, I've talked to a lot of Israeli venture capital people. The Chinese would steal technology if they could, but sometimes it's not convenient. So the Chinese offer very good prices for Israeli tech companies. Uh, they've been they haven't been cheapskates. They haven't been stingy in paying for Israeli technology. The problem is access, because the United States is strongly discouraging Israel from allowing China to buy Israeli technology.
What's limiting Israeli tech companies to sell technology into China? Like, if you have a private company, would someone tell you not to sell, not to buy, not to sell your company like it's a private firm? Do you know something that limits Israel capacity to sell
That
companies or to buy companies?
This is a good question. I don't know to what extent the government is involved in the approval process, but I think there probably is a certain amount of government involvement. And this has been a serious issue. So Israel has a real problem long term, which is we are the ally of a declining superpower. We have to be an ally of the United States now. We have no choice. Where else do we get fighter planes or missiles? We can make some of our own, but a lot of what we make is in a joint venture with the United States. So the American alliance is necessary, but China is a growing power and not inherently hostile to Israel, simply indifferent. So Israel has the difficult problem of finding a way to maintain relations with China and with Russia, because Russia is important in Syria and elsewhere, while maintaining the alliance with the United States. It's difficult. I'm glad I don't have that job.
Sure thing. Actually, Israel went into this war from a very divisive year of protest and demonstrations in the street, and right now we feel that we get together again. What do you think is the mechanism that will keep us together, keep us united, and wouldn't blow the Israeli society again all over in a very decisive manner?
Well, Joseph Soloveitchik, who's probably better known in the religious world in the United States than in Israel, talked about the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. Fate is the fact that we're all Jews. You can be the most secular, pro-Palestinian peacenik, and Hamas will still come and cut your throat the same way they'll cut mine. So we're all in it together. And we learned about fate in a terrible and painful way on October 7th. And of course, that brought us together. The covenant of destiny is that what we choose ourselves to build a destiny as Am Yisrael, and how we choose that in a divided society is very difficult. And this goes back to the divisions in the Jewish people over the Zionist movement from before the founding of the state and afterwards. I think there is an important idea that Rav Soloveitchik talked about. From the standpoint of Rav Soloveitchik, to be a scientist, to cure disease, to stop floods and earthquakes, to improve the condition of mankind, is a religious obligation. It's as much of a religious obligation as being Shomer Shabbat. What is Shabbat? HaKadosh Baruch Hu stops creating. Why does he stop creating on the seventh day? So that human beings could be creators. So we become the partners in a covenant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in finishing the work of creation. So from the Soloveitchik standpoint, scientific discovery is a religious obligation just as the ritual obligations are. They're part of the same relationship between God and human beings. And even more so, the Jewish idea is that somehow we finite human beings can engage, can be partners of an infinite God. Now, sometimes this looks crazy. It looks ridiculous. Half of Jewish humor are jokes about limited God, limited man, unlimited God. How is it possible for them to engage? But this Jewish idea also means that the infinite engages the finite. And one of Soloveitchik's greatest contributions as a Jewish thinker is to show the relationship between Jewish hashkafa and the scientific revolution and the mathematics of the infinite. When he taught Bereshit at Yeshiva University, and there's a wonderful journal called Hakira, which has published these lectures. He related Chumash to the discovery of the infinitesimal calculus and higher concepts in physics. So I think you can say that the Jewish idea that finite man can engage the infinite God is one of the principal sources of modern science, of the outlook of modern science. And it's no accident that we have 50 Nobel Prize winners in physics who are Jewish and a similar number of mathematicians. There's a disproportionate, incredibly disproportionate contribution of Jews to science and mathematics because our hashkafa evokes this kind of thing. So I believe that when I look at Torah Judaism, I'm a midlife Baal Tshuva, so I'm no expert, I'm no rabbi, but this means a great deal to me personally. I think there's no Am Yisrael without Torah. But Torah is not simply, reading Gemara in a yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Gemara, the Jewish hashkafa, Jewish Torah also encompasses an approach to science, to the world, which allows us to go to the secular Israelis who are studying at the Weizmann Institute and say, we have something to tell you. There's a reason why you as a Jew have a responsibility, and there's something you can learn from Torah. So I think that the Haredi, that the religious, have to shake the dust off from sitting in the yeshiva reading Gemara and think about the broader implications of Jewish hashkafa, and the secular have a responsibility as Jews to understand why there's something special about Jews in the sciences and why we're so brilliant. It's not simply that we have good genes. It's because Torah has something to say about the secular world. So I wrote an article in Tablet magazine, a Jewish webzine, called The Soloveitchik Solution. That the Orthodox should try to speak to the most productive and forward-looking of the secular Jews in their terms. If there's a problem in Am Yisrael, it's because we don't have enough Torah. So those of us who represent Torah, it's our responsibility to do the outreach. Otherwise, we're talking to the lost children who are like, kidnapped children don't know anything. You can't expect them to come to us because they don't know.
So about the dialogue between the ultra-Orthodox or between Torah and the science world, I really like Jonathan Sachs' book, The Great Partnership, God, Science, and the Search for Meaning. I think it elaborates in a great manner the way that those two parts, the morality and the science, can live together. But I would really like to introduce also Itai Blank, who matched us together and made this interview possible. He wants to ask a few questions, so please, Itai.
Hi, Itai.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long, David, but I just have, I think, one quick question and two medium questions. So I'll start with the easy one. You seem to touch upon that earlier in the conversation, but a lot of people bring up a crisis of fertility when talking about China these days, and you don't seem to think that there should be concern about that. I wonder why is that?
On the contrary, there's a lot of concern. They have a fertility problem. The question is, what do they do about it? Iran has a fertility problem, so they want to conquer the whole Shia crescent between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. That's their response. China has a fertility problem. So they want to extend the Chinese model to absorb billions of people in the global south, starting with Southeast Asia. I worked on a task force at the Department of Defense on this a dozen years ago. Everybody knew China had a fertility problem back then. When you don't have enough young people, what can you do? Well, one is you can get immigrants. Chinese are not going to get immigrants. The second is you can take your capital and technology and employ young people outside your country. So the Belt and Road Initiative, by extending Chinese infrastructure throughout Eurasia and also to Latin America, to some extent Africa, is designed to lock in billions of people into the Chinese economic model and make them part of the Chinese economic system. I call this the Sino-forming of the global South in a book I published in 2020. And China has spent more than $1 trillion to do this. It's the biggest economic event of our lifetime. So China, as a result, now exports more to the developing world than it does to all developed markets. And its digital and physical infrastructure are transforming economies that include billions of people. So yes, of course they have a problem, but it doesn't mean the problem will simply sit there and kill them. It means their response is going to change the world in fundamental ways. Now, as far as the Chinese economy is concerned, the best example to look at is Korea. Korea, between 1997, there was an Asian financial crisis, mini crisis. And a lot of famous economists like Paul Krugman said, the Asian tigers are finished. They've used up, they've made the farmers into industrial workers. They've run out of farmers. That's it. They're going to decline. Instead, Korea exploded in a good way, became a manufacturing superpower. It increased production, industrial production, five times between 1998 and 2015. Its workforce declined by 20% during the same period. I'm sorry, it increased 4.
So they become more productive?
They not only became more productive, they developed whole new industries. They became a force in the auto industry. They never produced cars before, but now they're a major car producer. They never produced semiconductors, flat panel TVs. They developed whole entirely new industries. How did it happen? They educated their workforce. They went from being a country of farmers to a country of engineers. Now, China, in 1980, when Xi Jinping started the reforms that led to China's growth, only 3% of Chinese had tertiary education beyond high school. Now it's 63%. That's European levels. So China has a highly educated workforce that it didn't have back then. Even if it has a declining workforce, the multiplier effect of technology and education will get them through the next 20 years. Past that, if they can create an economic empire, which includes billions of people outside China, it'll get them through the next century. So, yes, China's demographics are a critical thing. They are the main driver for policies which are transforming the whole world economy.
Right. So they're addressing that with strategy. It's not just happening to them.
No, absolutely. It's a very well thought out program. It's not completely successful. There have been many failures. For example, Pakistan. They put $65 billion into Pakistan. That's a disappointment because Pakistani jihadists are murdering Chinese engineers. I wrote an article in Asia Times saying, you don't want Hamas to win. please, if Hamas wins, they'll go kill Chinese engineers all over the world like they're doing in Pakistan. So you really should be on our side.
Right.
I don't know if they believed it, but anyway, I was trying to doing my best to convince them.
It can't hurt. I was also wondering regarding the more general topic of Tamir's last question of bringing Israeli society together, religious and secular. Do you think that is something that could be done top down? Is it something that a state can decide to do, or is it something that should?
Oh, look, you have an education ministry for what it's worth, but for example, Tamir mentioned Jonathan Sacks. It's a good book, but some of the most interesting topics don't come into it. For example, uh, one of the most interesting relationships between our Hashkafa and Western philosophy is the relationship between the Hegelian dialectic and the Kabbalah of the Arizal, of Isaac Luria. The idea that in order to create the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu first had to engage in Tzimtzum, to contract himself, to create an empty space, a nothing, if you will, in which there was room to make something that that was not God. This is, I think there's very good reason to believe that Hegel was deeply influenced by this. It's a point well developed by Rav Soloveitchik. And I think you can argue without much controversy that Hegel's dialectic was fundamental to the 19th century revolution in physics and mathematics. There are many historians of science who document this. So simply to take what Soloveitchik called the secret that Judaism gave to the world, the secret of Tzimtzum, and demonstrate how powerful and fecund this was for the transformation of Western thinking in science and mathematics. I think this kind of thing would really affect the way secular Israeli scientists think about things. And, why wait for the government? This is something that religious Jews can do. I realize that the presence of the Soloveitchik variety of Judaism is not that strong in Israel as it is in the U.S. But unfortunately, the Holocaust destroyed a whole generation of people, of great religious Jewish scholars who were educated in European culture as well, and had no fear of European culture because they were masters of Torah, and they could look at European culture from the standpoint of the strength of their own religious convictions, their own hashkafa. And we've lost that. And I think reviving that is a critical idea. The things that most interest me are actually not the geopolitics, which are just depressing. I've written a series of articles for Hakirah, it's a Jewish journal in the United States, on Torah and science and related topics, and I hope somebody reads them. I think you did, so I'm very grateful for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last thing I want to ask is, we had a guest on lately who suggested that the surprising, maybe surprising is not the word, but the unpleasant degree to which we witness support for Hamas globally right now, people seem to think naively that has to do with anti-Semitism. But he pointed out that the countries with the most anti-Semitic populations are not necessarily those with the most anti-Israeli attitude right now. So I was wondering if you think there's another factor governing that attitude. He seemed to suggest that it was fear of local Muslim riots. So the more there is a Muslim presence in the country, the more likely it is to be afraid of such riots.
Well, that's certainly the case. I mean, Muslims are officially 7% of the British and French population, about the same in Germany. In the US, it's 1%. So demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people in Britain. Of course, there's going to be an issue. On the other hand, the Germans have been relatively supportive at the government level, even though they have revolt among their population. I think that there's a deep relationship between the woke left, the cultural left, and the Muslims on this, and that Judaism, from the standpoint of the woke left, is the enemy. It represents tradition, continuity, absolute values. Men are men, women are women. The Torah says there's right and wrong. And the whole point of the woke left is there's no right and wrong. It's only what makes me feel good. I can have any identity I want. If I want to identify as a dog or a female or neither or both, I can do whatever I want. So Judaism, from that standpoint, the Jewish people are the polar opposite in human thought to the woke left because we represent eternal values. Of course they hate us. They also tend to believe falsely that just because somebody is poor and beaten up, it means they're virtuous, which is sadly not true. I think we are seeing an explosion of anti-Semitism. It's quite shocking, surprised me to what extent it's come out. And our only defense is Pachat Yisrael, the dread of Israel. If they don't like us, let them be afraid of us.
Thank you so much.
So I really want to thank you, David Goldman, for coming to my show.
Muted. You're on mute. Sorry.
So I really want to thank you, David Goldman, for coming to my show. Actually, I really want to give a big recommendation about your book, How Civilization Die and Why Islam is Dying Too. To the Israeli public, it was translated by Sela Meir Publishing, and it was the first book who initiated the publishing, so it must have been a really good book. And it really an eye-opening about demographics, fertility rate, and how it influences society, economics, and also violence and wars. And what you just said about not only learning about geopolitics, which is quite depressing or very depressing, so I take it as a really good suggestion, not to learn only about the politics, but also about your life, about morality, about Judaism, and really keep writing in tablet and in the Asia Times, because I think that the connection you make between the Jewish part and the politics and stuff like that is really an eye-opening, and thank you very much for your...
So, Tamir, thank you for an excellent conversation and for the kind invitation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Itai.
Thank you as well.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thank you.